Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Thank you for watching, thank you for being here. For today, we're gonna be starting my long-belated recap of all the TV I've seen so far in 2020, and there's a lot of ground to cover. So I've decided to split my TV coverage into two different videos, and I've divided the shows in a certain way. So for this video, I'll be talking about comedies and half-hour shows, as well as a few mini-series that I've been able to watch so far this year. However, before anything else, I really do have to mention the things that have been going on. At the time of my recording this, there was a Pride March earlier in the day where it was a peaceful Pride March that was violently dispersed by police. Protesters were arrested and detained for absolutely no reason, and if this isn't evidence that the police will abuse the power that the terror bill will give them, then I don't know what is. It's a difficult thing to face, like this just blatant abuse of power, this blatant bigotry against the LGBT plus community. And there are, it's easy to feel helpless, and I am still trying to figure out ways on how we can all help with that situation. So below in the description, in addition to helpfromhome.ph, which I've been sharing to you guys for the past few videos, I'm also leaving some links to different bail funds for the people who were detained. Hopefully we can help them out, we can help them get the freedom that they so deserve. So yeah, if there's anything else, any other ways for us to help, I also would like to know. Please do leave me a comment below this video. So yeah, please do keep that in mind no matter what TV or movie you're watching. I have no way to make like a smooth transition into just talking about TV, but we're gonna do it anyway. So the first new show that I was able to see in 2020 is actually the new Dracula miniseries, which is only 3 episodes long and you can watch it on Netflix. It comes to us from Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat, who you might know as the people who brought us Sherlock. And their take on Dracula is really funny in like a campy way, but it's also like awesomely horrifying. There are certain parts in this 3-episode miniseries that are genuinely scary and really revel in like old school body horror, which was incredible to see. A lot of people who have seen this miniseries have commented that the 3rd episode is really bizarre, and I agree. It's definitely not as heavy and it's very strange compared to the other 2 episodes, but I personally got used to it. And I think that every single episode is still really well plotted, very meticulous in the way that the central mystery is constructed. And even if you're familiar with the original novel, I think this miniseries will really keep you on your toes. Claes Bang plays the titular Dracula, and he is as good as you want him to be. He's so charismatic, but he's also pure evil. But even more impressive than him, to me, was Dolly Wells, who plays Sister Agatha, who is like the horror heroine I've been waiting for. It's so rare to get like a horror movie or a horror series that gives us a protagonist who's as interesting and as memorable as the antagonist, and Sister Agatha is someone I would follow into battle, no questions asked. Next up, really quickly, I just want to touch on the last 2 parts of the Arrowverse crossover event from 2019 to 2020, Crisis on Infinite Earths. I talked about the first 3 parts in another video somewhere in the past. And I enjoyed those first 3 parts a lot. These last 2 parts, however, I didn't enjoy quite as much. I think it is very impressive as like a show of corporate synergy. I'm sure it was a nightmare to get all the contracts in order, but they somehow managed to connect literally every single DC property on screen, which is pretty impressive, yes. However, as storytelling, these last 2 episodes are incredibly rushed. There are big things that happen, there are characters who die, and I didn't feel the weight of any of it because the show was just trying to move so quickly. And while this crossover event really does set things up for the franchise moving forward, I'm not convinced that the things it sets up will be good for some of the characters, specifically Black Lightning. What makes that series so good is that it is self-contained and it really manages to say something meaningful about being Black in America. And I don't know if the crossover stuff is actually going to help with that message and whatnot, so we'll see. Another mini-series that you can catch on Netflix is a series entitled Unorthodox, which is about a Hasidic Jewish woman who escapes from her community to find a new life for herself in Berlin as her husband pursues her. This is one of those critically acclaimed series that I'm actually not as big a fan of. However, in terms of its direction, I think it's incredibly well done. Maria Schrader, who directed every episode, is really detail-oriented, and every time there's an intimate moment with Esty, who's the main character, or if there's like a Jewish ritual going on screen, she really forces us to pay attention to what's going on, allows us to take everything in. However, the story that Unorthodox tells to me isn't completely satisfying. The way it chooses to end is kind of baffling to me. And the way that the story is structured, it goes for like a non-linear narrative, but I actually don't think that the non-linear structure helps. I think it just kind of stalls the momentum in a lot of places, and that if they decided to tell the story in a completely linear fashion, I think it would have been more emotional. However, the reason to watch this miniseries is Shira Haas, who is the main character, and she blows it out of the water. She is so incredibly good. She's so well cast. She keeps this fragility to Esty the entire series, but she builds like this sense of independence and freedom, and just, you know, really goes for it on top. It's just such a well-crafted performance, and she's incredible in it. But the best miniseries that I've been able to see so far in 2020 is Mrs. America. This is a story about the Equal Rights Amendment in the United States in the 1970s. It takes the perspectives of many different women involved with this movement, but it mainly takes the perspective of Phyllis Schlafly, played by Cate Blanchett, who was actually against the ERA. It's not the most intersectional show in the world. It is about feminism, but it's still very white. Like, there's not a lot of input from women of color, unfortunately. However, I think this show is aware of that fact, and it criticizes that fact as well. And the number of perspectives it still manages to include into the 9 episodes is incredible. In fact, the most impressive parts of the show for me are the parts where it focuses on all these women on the left, on the pro-ERA side, and how they're all in conflict with each other because they're all in disagreement over what the amendment should include, over what compromises they should make. That's very relevant even up to today as people continue that debate. The show doesn't really give everybody equal nuance. Some episodes that are focused on certain characters are weaker than others, and people have criticized rightfully the portrayal, or sorry, the writing of Phyllis Schlafly as a character, because the real person was probably more monstrous than the character was. However, again, like I said, I think the show is aware of its limitations, and there's always a disclaimer at the start that says that this isn't meant to be taken as, you know, real fact. And just like with Unorthodox, the main reason to watch this show is the fact that the performances are so good. You have an entire cast here of A-list actresses who are putting on some of the best work that they've ever put. Uzo Aduba, Marco Martindale, Tracy Ullman, who is fantastic, and especially Cate Blanchett, who, mark my words, is going to win the Emmy for lead actress in a limited series this year. Now, moving on to comedies / half-hour shows, first of all, let's talk about Little America. This is a little anthology series, just 8 episodes so far, and every episode focuses on a different American immigrant. And when I first heard about the show, I was a little hesitant because it sounded like it would be really depressing given the state of discourse in America about immigration. But surprisingly, it's not. It's a very wholesome and sweet show that really humanizes every single main character in all of these episodes. And it has a really strong sort of thesis statement throughout the entire thing. It really recognizes that all these immigrants are, number one, obviously human beings who go to America to discover who they really are, what they're interested in, what community they belong in. And the portrayal of America as a country is surprisingly consistent across these 8 episodes, despite the different directors. The show really portrays America as, yes, a land of opportunity, but also as a place that is incredibly rigorous in terms of how it chooses to give this freedom to these immigrants. Like with any anthology show, some episodes are weaker than others. However, pretty much all of them have really strong, beautiful moments that just knock the wind out of me. They're all so well put together, they're all really well performed. And my 2 favorite episodes from this show are, number 1, The Jaguar, which is about a Spanish immigrant who begins to take up squash, which is really fun. And the second one of my favorite episodes of the year so far, is entitled The Cowboy, which is about a Nigerian student who, through like stereotypical West American iconography like the cowboy and the Wild West and stuff, he manages to sort of find his own individuality, and it's so well done. It's amazing. Speaking of my favorite episodes of the year so far, my single favorite episode of 2020 so far this year is undoubtedly the final episode of The Good Place. So let's talk a little bit about these last 4 episodes that aired in 2020. As a whole, season 4 of The Good Place isn't the greatest. I think that it is definitely uneven in terms of its structure. It spends too much time with like the new human characters instead of focusing on like the main question of what the good place should be. However, it's still entertaining, and the final episode, which is an hour long, is just this absolutely beautiful statement on humanity's inherent capability for goodness. It talks about death and what we should make of it. And it's an hour long, and I think I was emotional throughout almost all of it, and I cry now when I just think about the episode. There's something about the way Mike Schur directed and wrote this episode that's just so devastating, but it's also really warm and it's really soulful. Like, I don't think I've ever seen like a half-hour comedy really wreck me this much. It's the kind of episode that I genuinely believe will help people become better people, and it makes me excited to do good. And its idea of the afterlife is so reassuring and so nice that I actually think I believe it in real life. Next, let's talk about the first season of the Harley Quinn animated series, specifically episodes 6 to 13, which aired this year. In my last video, when I talked about Birds of Prey, I referenced this show and I said that I wished that the storyline for Harley in Birds of Prey had the same nuance as the storyline here about her breakup with the Joker. And I stand by that. I think the way they tell that story is incredible. I mean, this is a very crass and loud animated comedy about superheroes and supervillains, but deep down it really is a story about a woman trying to be her own person and trying to move on after a very toxic relationship. And I like that they really dive deep into that. They don't just make Harley out to be like just a one-sided victim or somebody like that. They really show that she is still trying to unlearn a lot of stuff that she learned from her relationship with the Joker. It is messy and excessive in a lot of spots, but the show in general is just so entertaining and so funny and weirdly sincere and wholesome. Every single character here is hilarious. Like the way they're portrayed, the way they're written, they always have something really funny going for them. Christopher Meloni plays a really jaded, burnt-out Jim Gordon, which is like my favorite iteration of the character. Alan Tudyk is having so much fun playing both the Joker and Clayface. Tony Hale from Veep is playing Dr. Psycho, and he's just perfectly cast. But my favorite performer and character in this whole show is Lake Bell as Poison Ivy, who is just the perfect sarcastic best friend. Speaking of wholesome shows, let's talk about High Maintenance Season 4, which is one of my favorite shows of all time. It's an anthology show where every episode focuses on a different New Yorker or a different set of New Yorkers, and they're always like very eccentric or living on the fringes, or they have weird jobs and whatnot. And the show continues to find just really compelling stories for these people. It allows them to untangle very complicated emotions. It allows them to have these fleeting but very meaningful interactions with other people. And the only thing that connects all these stories is the fact that all these people have the same weed dealer who has no name, and he's played by Ben Sinclair. Some of the episodes in this season are a little cynical for my taste, but for the most part they're all very warm, and the direction continues to be very inventive. Like this season, there's an entire episode told from the point of view of a lighter. I mean, come on. And Ben Sinclair, who only really appears in like little bits throughout every episode, always finds a way to make his character a little more nuanced, and here you come to know things about him that you never knew about before. So I really love that about the show. It's very sweet and it's very, again, reassuring. However, we can't talk about wholesome shows without talking about Schitt's Creek, which had its 6th and final season this year. If you don't know what Schitt's Creek is about, it started out as a show about a family of very privileged people who lose all their wealth and they end up living in the motel of this small town that they used to own. But over the years, Schitt's Creek has really evolved and grown and blossomed into an absolutely beautiful show about love and family and self-acceptance and whatnot. And while those are very universal things that a lot of shows tackle, I don't know many shows that tackle them as well as Schitt's Creek does. The character work in this show is just unbelievable. I used to dislike the Roses a lot in the first season, and now I think they're genuinely inspirational people, and I really miss them, and I find myself thinking about what these characters must be doing post-series finale. And what's really ballsy about Schitt's Creek is that it doesn't actually revolve any major source of conflict. Like if there's any conflict, it's usually resolved by the end of the episode or like after a few episodes. There's no high drama here, and that's actually very difficult to pull off from a writing standpoint, to have no real conflict but keep these characters interesting and keep yourself emotionally invested in the characters. And of course, a lot of people have already said just how insanely good Catherine O'Hara here is as Moira Rose. Her portrayal of this character is just so unhinged. Like, everything from the way she dresses to just the way she enunciates certain words is just comedy gold. She has created one of the great all-time comedy characters on TV. However, my favorite performers and characters on this show are still number one, Emily Hampshire as Stevie, who is, again, like Poison Ivy, like the perfect sarcastic best friend. And number two, Annie Murphy as Alexis Rose, who I think is one of the most underrated actresses like on TV, period. I think she's just as funny as Catherine O'Hara. I think her performance is just as meticulous in the way that, in terms of her timing, in terms of like what she does with her voice and her actions, but she also manages to give Alexis like a real sense of maturity throughout the show. It's incredible, and like, she's the character I miss the most. Talking about another show that sort of flew under the radar for a lot of people is Better Things Season 4. I'm not sure if there's going to be a Season 5 yet, I really hope so. The elevator pitch for the show is that it's essentially about a single mother who's also an actress in her middle age, Sam Fox, played by Pamela Adlon, as she raises three very independent and very outspoken daughters. It's also pretty much a show about being a woman and how complicated all of that is. And while past seasons sort of validated Sam's frustration and anger to the world, this season really asks her what to do with that anger and asks her if forgiveness is a viable option in her age. It is also, and I know that this is gonna sound like a bold statement, it's the best directed show on TV, period. Like, there's nobody else who comes close. And I think the main thing that makes Pamela Adlon's direction so unique is how she's able to take like mundane events and inject them with like this magic to make them just feel important and make them feel like they're once in a lifetime, even if they're completely ordinary. And the best example of that direction is the episode in this season entitled New Orleans, which is really just Sam in New Orleans falling in love with a new place, with the new people, with a new culture, and all of it just feels like a celebration of life. And I don't know anybody who can do it like her. She's been directing every single episode of the show since season 2, and she's only gotten stronger and stronger as a director. She's a real auteur. It's also just still so well acted because none of these actors seem like they're acting, and they manage to house all these contradictions of their characters into like a really coherent performance. And in this season in particular, one of the rare joys is to see a character, an actor, really grow up right in front of you. And here, the youngest daughter, Duke, played by Olivia Edward, like, she is so different now, but you can see how she's grown up. Like, in season 1, she was like a really little girl, and here she's pretty, and Olivia Edwards has proven that she is a completely competent actor on her own. Next up, we have Brockmire, which had its 4th and final season this year. Again, the elevator pitch for this is that it's about Jim Brockmire, played by Hank Azaria, who is a washed-up baseball announcer who's dealing with addiction and the fact that he doesn't really belong in this time and place anymore. However, what is different about season 4 of Brockmire is that it takes a huge stylistic leap. It's essentially like a sci-fi dystopian show in season 4. It's an interesting approach that allows the show to really critique baseball and its place in American culture, but because it spends more time doing that, it kind of sidelines what to me is the heart of the show, which is Jim's struggles with addiction. So that's sort of left behind in the dust, unfortunately. This season also has like Filipino characters, and their Tagalog is absolutely atrocious. I don't know why they didn't get like actual Tagalog speakers to write the dialogue and like perform it. So while this season of Brockmire isn't the best, I think that the joke-to-minute ratio is still really strong. It's still a very funny show, and that's mostly thanks to Hank Azaria, who, like with Catherine O'Hara and Moira Rose, he crafts an all-time great comedy character here. And what's so great about Brockmire as a character is that he's essentially like a boomer, but he's really trying to be politically correct, and he's trying to be good. And his efforts are so sincere that no matter how much you hate him in the first season, here you really, really love him. Next up, this is a show that is not necessarily a comedy, but it's like a half-hour drama, and it's called Vida. This is about two estranged Latinx sisters who are brought together after the death of their mother, and they inherit the bar that she used to own. The first season of Vida had this very distinct directorial style that was very floaty and very shaky, and lots of close-up and no music and whatnot. It didn't really work back then, but at this point I think the directors really found a way to make it work. It really just heightens all the raw emotions and makes us feel the vulnerability of these sisters and the other characters. The downside to this season is the fact that it's so short. It's only 6 episodes long, and this is the final season of the entire series. And as a result, my favorite character, Emma, who's played by Michelle Prada, she's sort of sidelined. She doesn't get as much development as she did before, and the stuff that she does get, to me, is a little cliche. However, the story that this season tells is still really tightly woven and very intersectional. It's essentially a story about loss and broken families and gender and privilege, especially in the context of Latinx communities in the United States that are being gentrified. Melissa Barrera, who plays the other sister, Lynn, finally gets the space to give her character lots of maturity. She really gets to shine in this season more so than in the previous 2. And Michelle Prada, as little as she gets, is still so unbelievably talented. Like, I can't believe she hasn't been getting like any awards recognition, because she is truly magnificent in this show. However, the main show that I wanted to talk about for this episode is the 6th and final season of BoJack Horseman, specifically the second half of the 6th season. This is the best half-hour show that I've seen so far this year. First of all, a round of applause to Will Arnett, who has given us the performance of a lifetime as BoJack. He doesn't necessarily change his voice or anything, but you can tell every time BoJack is on screen that Will Arnett is acting his ass off. He's performing, he's feeling this character. He really understands that BoJack is just 100% defense mechanism, and it takes so long for this character to admit to even the smallest wrongdoing. But Will Arnett finds a way to make that interesting, to make it nuanced and whatnot. But my favorite character in the show is still Diane Nguyen, voiced by Alison Brie. And putting aside the fact that, you know, Alison Brie is not Asian, and that should have been corrected like in casting all those years ago, she's still incredible in the role. I only hear Diane when she performs this character. And it's really great to see that in season 6, BoJack Horseman has really embraced animation as a medium. Because, you know, back in season 1, the show used to just be sort of like a Family Guy clone, where the most inventive thing they did was cut away to like another vignette and cut back. But here, like, the directors are so confident with their craft. There are some sequences here that feel like they're being directed like live action dramas, just because, you know, they allow the characters to carry the scenes, they allow the dialogue to carry the scenes. However, there are also other episodes that fully take advantage of the animated medium, especially the second to the last episode, The View from Halfway Down, which is, I think, which already has gone down in history as one of the best animated episodes ever done. It's so depressing and it's so inventive the way that it's done. Like, this is stuff that you really wouldn't be able to do in live action. What's special about the second half of the 6th season of BoJack Horseman is that it's the part of the show that really finally lets everything crumble down around BoJack. It's the part of the show that finally asks us to hold BoJack accountable for every single horrible thing that he's done. And what I love is that the show does not hold back. It gives nuance to BoJack processing his grief and his faults, but it doesn't let him off the hook. However, I don't think that the show is just nihilistic. I actually think it's very compassionate. I think it understands its character very well, while still, while never invalidating how other characters have been affected by his bad decisions. And the very, very last scene of the show, I think, is just out of this world. It's so mature and it's so unique for a cartoon. It gives a really important message, especially in this sort of climate where a lot of men are trying to figure out what to do with all this sort of residual guilt that they feel. So if you haven't seen BoJack Horseman and if you haven't seen The Good Place, my suggestion would be to watch both of those shows. But before you get to the final episodes, watch the finale of The Good Place. Watch the finale of BoJack Horseman, then watch the finale of The Good Place. It'll be the best existential crisis cocktail you've ever had. Alright, so those are my thoughts on a bunch of TV that I've seen so far this year. Please stay tuned for the next episode where we'll be talking about hour-long dramas. And as always, please stay safe and stay healthy. Again, please refer to the links I have down below to figure out how you can help with the people who've been detained at the Pride March today and with everybody who is vulnerable at this time of the coronavirus. With that said, please do leave me a comment if you'd like down below, and let's have a conversation.